My name is Pete Oxley. I'm a guitar player, mostly in the jazz sphere, and I run the jazz club, The Spin, which I set up with two other guys back in 1999. I started playing jazz seriously back in about 1985-ish. It was a result of hearing the Miles Davis album, Kind of Blue. It just blew me away, as it has done with so many musicians. It was a seminal point in my musical career. When I heard that, I remember this feeling of, I want this music now, and doing anything I could to try and access a way into it. When I first started playing jazz, as with many guitar players, we listened to Django Reinhardt. He was one of the first great jazz guitar players, and I think pretty much every jazz guitar player has gone through listening to him, and I certainly did, but I didn't have that kind of gypsy technique, which is quite particular. As I'd heard Kind of Blue, which is a very, very different vibe, I was interested in kind of accessing that kind of music. So when I really got serious about it, I started listening to all the records from the period of Kind of Blue, so the very late 50s into the very early 60s. So Eddie Miles from that period, and all his associated musicians, Cannonball Adderley, Coltrane, of course, Bill Evans. And then I very quickly discovered Wes Montgomery, who was a guitar player of the same period, and I loved his playing. I began trying to really take on board the whole tradition of jazz playing at that point. And then there came another turning point in the way I was influenced with music. When I was living in Paris and I went to the New Morning Jazz Club, and I heard Michael Brecker's band with Mike Stern in the group. And this band just blew me away. And I sort of went from one day to the next, from listening to late 50s, early 1960s, to listening to what was going on in the day, which was like by then it was like the mid-late 1980s. And Mike Stern, of course, was one of the guys. And the next thing I heard was Pat Metheny, and his lyrical style totally resonated with me. And basically, I've been a fan of Metheny ever since. So when I'm improvising, the stimulus for what I play is really very much based on what I'm hearing from the other members of the band. I'm hoping that they're going to, first of all, give me a foundation upon which to play, which is comfortable in terms of the rhythm section, the way they're grooving, the time and the soundscape of it. And then that it becomes interplay. So it becomes an organic thing. You know, I might play a line, somebody might respond to that. Or somebody may, in the rhythm section, start some kind of rhythmic idea that wasn't there before, which might send me in a direction. And aside from that, really, it's as little thinking, as little conscious thinking as possible. And that's where, in the practicing process, I'm trying to accumulate as much musical information, little by little. It's a slow process. But by accumulating that information, when you're actually on the bandstand, you don't have to do the thinking, and then you're free to play, just to play freely. I would say if somebody wanted to start playing jazz, the advice I would give them is to listen, find the musicians that they enjoy, transcribe their solos, understand what it is about the parts of the solo they like. So if they transcribe a line, if they love a line, they transcribe it, look at the harmony that line is based upon, and then they can analyze it and learn what makes it sound, what gives it that color. It's an invaluable thing to do, and at the same time they're working on their ears. Their ears are becoming faster at recognizing the color of music, in a way, if I could put it that way. Good evening, folks. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to you. Welcome to The Spin tonight. If I could play with any musician, it would be Lyle Mays, the partner of Pat Metheny. Just that he was one of the greatest musicians as a composer, an arranger, a stylist of sounds. I don't think there's any keyboard player I know that had such a mastery over sounds, over the colours, with all these keyboards he had, and the way he reprogrammed them sound beautiful and interesting. And I just figure I could learn a massive amount from spending some time with Lyle Mays. I mean, so every now and again, I listen to something of Lyle's and I try to transcribe what he's playing. It's just so incredible. His voicings, they're really like nobody else's. We've had so many great gigs at the Spin, and to be able to point out the highlights, there has been so many, but just off the top of my head, I would say when we had Nigel Kennedy guesting with us a couple of times actually, but particularly the first time when he came on stage at the end of the gig with John Etheridge, and he arrived quite late. I think it was about midnight before we started playing with him. Nobody in the audience had left. Everybody had somehow got the vibe that he was going to be the surprise guest. He walked on stage, tuned his violin up, and then I think without counting anybody in or even asking us if we wanted to play this tune, he kicked off So What at high speed, and we were all kind of ready for this, and we jumped in on it, and then he took his first solo, and I was just astounded at the energy and the direction of his playing was just phenomenal. There was something that I hadn't quite experienced. And, Etheridge is in the band. Of course, John is a phenomenal player himself. There was something about the way Nigel played on that night which was special. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is what it feels like playing with a world-class virtuoso. I find a lot of people have terrible misconceptions about jazz, which put them off for coming out to jazz gigs. And I think the reason of that is that jazz, over its 120-year history, has gone through all sorts of styles. And I think that the way people have got put off by it is possibly they've heard something that they really don't like. They may have heard Dixieland jazz, or on a completely extreme other level, free jazz. And it makes no sense to them. And they say, well, I just don't understand jazz. It means nothing to me. Whereas if you could somehow draw them in and find the right area which appeals and resonates with them, I think there'd be a huge number of other jazz fans once they find their kind of tribe of music. And it's the thing we try to do at the Spin, is to make it as least specialist in a way as possible, to try and attract an audience that may not think they like jazz. Somehow you can get them there, play them something, and they may not even think it's jazz. They come to it and say, no, I really like this. I mean, I've played a lot of gigs where it's been, say, a community type thing, like a village hall kind of gig. And at the end, almost every time I'll have somebody coming up to me saying, I didn't think I liked jazz, but this was great. And it's because they've actually come, and then they realize you're playing things with melodies, the harmonies, and the improvisations are still melodic and still make some sort of coherent sense with the themes, that suddenly it's not kind of frightening or weird to them.
I've got a blue motel room with a blue bedspread. I've got the blues inside it.
If somebody's never heard jazz before, then I would put on Kind of Blue. I mean, again, kind of depending on their musical interests. If they're sort of quite open, I think if they've got a classical background, Kind of Blue is great. It's not aggressive music in any way. It's extremely warm sounding, but all the improvisations are fantastic. And I find it hard to imagine anybody with a musical ear wouldn't be attracted to that. People coming more from a kind of like a pop or a rock background, I would probably put on something from the Pat Metheny group, which is really full on with Pat playing on his guitar synthesizer and the band really going for it, because it's pretty blurry, the boundaries between that and a lot of rock music. One of the best pieces of advice I ever had as I was getting my playing career happening, and by then I was already gigging, was from a colleague I was playing with. And at that point, I remember being depressed at the end of a gig, I would say 9 out of 10 times, depressed with my own playing. And this guy who was in the band, who was on a much higher level than me, he said to me, look, if you're going to do the gigs, accept where you are today, because that's all you can be. Practice as hard as you can to be that little bit further the next day, and then that's where you'll be that day, and then enjoy it, because that's where you are. And that made all the difference. I went from being depressed 9 out of 10 gigs to being depressed 1 out of 10 gigs. It was a huge difference, and it freed me up then. If you're not anxious about the way you're playing and trying like, oh no, I'm going to mess up again or whatever, with this negative attitude, you are not going to play as well. So just that in itself was it felt like I made a quantum leap in my playing, certainly my enjoyment of the playing. One of the biggest challenges of being a jazz musician today is really that there's so much great music out there, and to find your own voice, there's always going to be something that you hear that's kind of in the genre that you're writing in, and you say to yourself, well, that's already been done and it's been done incredibly well. So to find your niche is extremely hard. Plus, on an actual playing level, there are so many great players. I mean, there are so many colleges now in the country, in the UK, that are training jazz musicians, and they all come out at a phenomenally high level. In fact, they go in at a really high level. So to forge your own niche with your own voice is very, very difficult today, I would say.